Today on Robert's Full English Breakfast Show, we have a local Greenwich man. He is, in fact, our local Member of Parliament, the Right Honourable Nick Raynsford. Nick, thank you so much for giving up so much of your important time, and I know it's very precious.
No, it's a pleasure.
First of all, I'd just like to say congratulations on your very recent marriage.
Thank you very much.
I hear you had a nice honeymoon in...
A short but very enjoyable honeymoon in Cornwall. Yes, we had 3 days in Cornwall.
Well, thank you for coming along. And I'd like to go right back to the start, sort of. You were brought up in a small village just outside Northamptonshire. Where was that?
I spent some of my youth in Milton Malzor, which is a small village just outside Northampton. But I also, in the course of my slightly unusual upbringing, spent time in Yorkshire, in Scarborough, in Goathland on the North York Moors, in Bradford, in Sheffield.
So you've travelled around a bit.
So, yes, I have a slightly peripatetic upbringing.
But you lived in a small cottage in Milton Manor?
Milton Malzor. Yes.
The cottage was in
the cottage was behind the manor house, where my father's family came from. My dad sadly was killed in the war before I was born, so I never knew him, but that was his background. And my mum initially lived there for a short while before going back to Yorkshire, where she came from, which is why we had a period of time living in the north. The
manor was quite an impressive building, and did that sort of perhaps fire your enthusiasm for houses? Because I think it's such a beautiful building, and I remember sort of seeing houses when I was young and being very inspired. Did that inspire you particularly, or perhaps it didn't?
Well, actually, my dad, in the single year before he joined up in the army in 1939, had been studying to be an architect. And I suspect there may be an element of that.
That's where it all came from. You then went on to Repton School, didn't you? Yes. What was the motto of that school? Do you remember?
Gosh, I can't remember, but the ethos was what I described as muscular Christianity.
Oh, right. Well, I think that's very good. The motto was Porta Cavat Culpa.
Oh, that's right. Don't blame the arch.
It says the gate is free from blame. Well, I think that's rather good, don't you? Did that gate lead to any doors opening?
It was a former monastic complex, and there were some remains of the old monastery. Repton had been actually the capital of Mercia in Saxon times, so it was a very important place, which is now a kind of rather obscure little village. But there were these monastic remains, of which the arch was one, and so that motto referred to.
Well, there were some quite notable old Reptonians.
Loads of archbishops. I did say this sort of Christianity was very much part of the...
There was Michael Ramsey, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yes.
Roald Dahl.
Yes, indeed.
Basil Rathbone, the actor who played Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
A goodie, Graham Garden.
Yes, yep.
And Jeremy Clarkson.
And yes, Jeremy Clarkson.
And of course,
fortunately,
yourself.
I was not there at the same time as him.
Well, after that, you went on to Sydney Sussex College at Cambridge.
Yes.
Do you remember the motto of that college?
It was Oliver Cromwell's former college, so Puritanism was pretty strongly imbued into the ethos of the college.
I'll give you a clue. It's God preserved me from slander and falsification. I thought that was rather good for an MP.
I don't actually recall that at all. But there was an incident shortly before I went to Cambridge, I think it was the year before, where the college had been given what was believed to be Oliver Cromwell's head. After the restoration of the Stuarts in 1660, Cromwell's body was dug up and hanged, drawn and quartered. Kind of barbarism. Head was stuck on a pole at Temple Bar. And it stayed there for several years until it blew down in a gale. And the story is that one of the soldiers who was on guard at the temple had been a former soldier in Cromwell's army, and out of respect for his former commander, looked after the head and kept it hidden in his family until the last member of their family died in the early 1960s. And in their will it was donated to Cromwell's former college. And I'm told that late at night the college master and the chaplain and one other senior member of the college, went out secretly and buried the head in an unknown location in the garden so that ghouls would not be able to go and dig it up.
Could you tell me something about night climbing? Because you were a high flyer from quite an early age, weren't you?
Well, there is a kind of interesting tradition in Cambridge of undergraduates climbing buildings at night, and there were some pretty celebrated night climbing events in the 1930s. And we were, myself and a few colleagues who were also climbers, were interested in finding ways up some of the routes that those 1930s climbers hadn't been able to get up, and also to repeat some of their great climbs, one of which had been King's College Chapel, which was probably the most celebrated climb in Cambridge. And the authorities had thought they had closed off the only available route up the college, up the chapel. So when we put a banner, Peace in Vietnam, across the two eastern pinnacles of the chapel, the college authorities had a nasty shock because they realised that the building was climbable once again.
And you became rusticated. Was that painful?
Not really, no. Sounds much worse than it is.
Can you tell me about being rusticated?
It meant that I wasn't able to take my degree for a year after I would have been otherwise entitled to get it, but I did in the end get it. So it wasn't that painful.
So they're quite strict about it. I mean, it's quite a famous thing that's been going on for years, yes. But they say the police are slightly more sympathetic towards it rather than the powers that be at the college.
Well, the interesting thing was after the Peace in Vietnam banner, it was reported that the porters of Sydney Sussex College were bragging around among their fellows and other college porters, saying it was our lads that did it. So I think there is a bit of an ambivalence. Officially, it's not approved of, but it's a long-established tradition. And
but your nightclub was about one of the most famous ones of the lot, wasn't it?
Yes.
Anyway, after Cambridge, you went to Chelsea School of Art.
Yes. Well, it was a curious process because I'd always had an interest in the arts, and in a way, there'd been a period in between. After I left Cambridge, I spent 2 years doing market research, and I had this frustration that I'd never really given my artistic interests an opportunity, and I therefore applied for and got a place at Chelsea School of Art, and came to the rather painful conclusion that I wasn't actually as talented as I would like to have been. But it was an important process in my kind of learning.
Some members of Parliament are in Parliament from the start. You actually did other things before you became it. You had a housing consultancy.
I had a life. I had a hinterland.
Tell me about.
I'm not one of those people who has been obsessive about politics from an early age, and I do think the whole political process is currently being endangered by the rise of the professional politicians who have never done anything else. After I left Chelsea School of Art, I went to work for a housing cooperative, and after that I went to the Shelter Housing Aid Centre, where I worked from 1973 through until 1986. And that, of course, got me into politics because I had to lobby MPs, I had to...
And you thought, well, I'll do it myself. If people aren't doing it, I better do it. That was 86,
that was 77.
Oh, 77.
Campaign. And following that, I did quite a lot of work when the Conservative government in the early 80s introduced the housing benefit scheme, and that was an appalling administrative fiasco. And again, we had loads and loads of people in deep trouble because they weren't getting their benefit and they weren't able to pay their rent. They were faced with threats of eviction. And that was another big campaign that I was involved in. That absolutely convinced me that I really should be trying to change the law rather than just helping people from the outside. So when the vacancy came up and there was an opportunity for me to apply to be the Labour candidate in Fulham, where I lived, I did. And rather surprisingly and unexpectedly, the Conservative MP for the area died very shortly afterwards. So I was flung into that extraordinary maelstrom of a by-election in early 1986 and was lucky enough to win it. And so became Member of Parliament for Fulham in 86. Didn't last long. The demography was not in favour of the Labour Party at the time, and in 1987 the seat reverted to the Conservative.
After that, what happened then? Sort of.
Well, then I had to make a living because I was out,
Yeah.
and I'd been MP for just a year. Shelter Housing Aid Centre had appointed someone else as their director, so I couldn't go back there. So I set up a consultancy using some of my expertise in the housing field.
So, Raynsford and Morris.
Raynsford and Morris, that's right.
Yeah.
And that was to give me the maximum flexibility to look for another parliamentary opportunity, because I had got the bug. I'd felt I was able to do things at Westminster. And I had friends here in Greenwich, and some of them asked me to put my name forward for consideration. And that was 1989, and I got selected right at the end of 89. So from 1990 onwards, I've been very much associated with politics here in Greenwich.
You had a fairly meteoric rise.
Well, I was elected in 92. I won the general election here. I became MP, had 5 very exciting years, both doing local campaigns, but also part of firstly John Smith's frontbench team and then Tony Blair's frontbench team in the run-up to the 1997 general election. And after we won the 97 general election, I was appointed Minister for London with the very interesting task of recreating what became the Greater London Authority. In other words, a democratic body to represent London.
And then, at what stage were you parliamentary private secretary to Roy Hattersley?
That was much earlier. That was in 1986. In my first period in Parliament, he asked me in the summer of 86, after I'd been in Parliament only a matter of a few months, if I'd be his PPS. And I did, and I had a very, very interesting time. Actually, I had a fascinating year when I was MP for that year, because I sat on the committee which approved the Channel Tunnel. Not the rail link, the tunnel itself.
Tunnel itself.
So we had an extraordinary busy time, because we had to take evidence from loads of people affected by the proposals before endorsing the legislation. And I did that, and I was also Roy Hattersley's PPS.
Did Roy Hattersley enjoy the spitting image of him?
The tub of lard.
Spitting.
He was philosophic about it. He is actually a very, very good company. He's a great person to be with a good sense of humour, and accepted some of the knocks that you get in politics. I did a number of jobs as Minister. I was Minister for London, as I've said, creating the Greater London Authority. I was also, at the same time, I was Construction Minister, and did a lot of work on trying to improve the operation of the construction industry in the UK. We commissioned a big report from Sir John Egan, which was very influential and has helped to shape the industry in a positive direction. In 1999, I became Housing Minister.
That is what you're
yes.
Most famous for, sort of.
And did that for 2 years. And then after the 2001 general election, I was asked to become Local Government Minister.
With special responsibilities, was it?
With a lot of other responsibilities. Initially for the fire service. The reform of the fire service was hugely important, and one of the things that's given me a lot of satisfaction is seeing the huge progress that's been made in the last 10 years in reducing fire deaths, numbers of people killed in fires, because of the greater focus on prevention. The culture of the fire service, right through until around the year 2000, had been very much putting out fires. So the focus was on the efficiency of the service in getting to a fire quickly and essentially putting water on the fire to douse it, or other more sophisticated means with more complex fires. What the statistics told me when I became Minister responsible for the fire service was very clearly and shockingly that half the people who died in domestic fires were dead before the alarm was raised. So however good the fire brigade were at getting to the fire, they could never save those lives. The only way you could do that was through prevention, which meant a whole series of measures, particularly targeting those properties or those people most at risk. And it was very easy to identify that. Multi-occupied houses, people with alcohol or drug abuse problems, elderly people, institutions with young people. These were places where fires were much more likely, multi-occupied houses indeed.
Yep.
And trying to focus the prevention on those, and making sure that smoke alarms were fitted wherever possible, and that those smoke alarms were effective,
and worked,
and the batteries hadn't been
left.
All of those things. It was extremely important to to get a strong focus on prevention, and that's happened and has been
Well,
really
thank
brilliant.
Thank you very much for that, I think.
After 9/11, the Home Secretary asked me to take responsibility for resilience planning in London. In other words, London's preparedness for coping with either a terrorist attack or a major emergency. And we did a huge amount of work to try and ensure that London was better prepared. By the time the attack came in 2005, I had left government. I was on the backbenches, but it was only a matter of months since I'd been responsible for it. And the incident, the attacks on the underground trains, we had actually tested 2 years before the capacity of the emergency services, obviously the fire service, the police and the ambulance service and the hospitals and everyone to cope with a major terrorist incident on London Underground. It had been a different scenario. It was a chemical attack rather than a bomb attack, but had been tested, and the readiness and the ability of the emergency services to cope was demonstrated on that terrible day in July 2005 when there were the bomb attacks on the Underground. And the one thing that I felt some comfort from all of that was the conclusions of the official inquiry and report on it, that no lives were lost that could have been saved.
In 2009, you publicly called for Gordon Brown to resign as Prime Minister. How did it make you feel? I felt when he became Prime Minister he had a good opportunity to do well. I think he rose to the huge challenge of the financial crisis in 2008. He was one of the very few world leaders who understood the nature of the crisis, just how serious it was, and who had some really practical proposals to recapitalise the banks to avoid the disaster becoming worse than it otherwise would have been. So I think in many ways he was very well equipped for that, but his personality was such that he did not succeed in running a successful government, and it was very clear to me that Labour was heading for a serious defeat in the 2010 general election if we continued with him as leader. And in those circumstances I felt it was more important to express my determination that there should be a government that was going to retain social responsibility through difficult times, rather than loyalty to the individual man. And I think with hindsight, I now look at the awful things that are happening because of the harsh policies being adopted by the present government, and I regret very much that we did lose that election so badly. Had we done less badly, I think there might have been a different coalition and there could have been a rather different policy at the present time. Apart from not getting re-elected, what do you consider has been the biggest failure of the last Labour government?
Gosh, there were a number. I think the biggest failure was to alienate a lot of people in public services who thought that the government, although well-intentioned in terms of its agenda for the health service, for education, for other public services, thought the government was trying to micromanage too much. And I do think the lesson for the future is we do need high-quality public services where the people working in those services feel that they are valued and respected and not simply being told by someone in Whitehall what to do.
How does it feel to go against what other people are wanting? It must happen in a political career. And, of course, most recently, there was the planning of the Greenwich market, which was going to be redeveloped, and there was an awful lot of people who were very much against it, including the councillors and the leader of Greenwich Council, and you were waving a flag very much for it.
Hang on, because actually there's a long history around this. The original proposals, which, gosh, these are now 7 or 8 years ago, which came from the advisors to Greenwich Hospital, were to close the market and build luxury housing all around the inside of the market area, which virtually everyone else in Greenwich said was absolutely outrageous. And I then worked with Greenwich Hospital, chairing a stakeholders group, to try and develop proposals that would enhance and preserve the market, while at the same time help the hospital to meet its financial objectives, which were being set by government and was expecting it to make. Out of that came the proposal for the regeneration of the market with a hotel wrapped around. I thought that was an interesting idea. We need more hotel accommodation in Greenwich. Greenwich is a great tourist destination, but it's traditionally been a day trip destination. And we've not had as much of the benefits for all businesses here, particularly the bars and restaurants and the theatre and other parts of our life here in Greenwich that would benefit much more from people staying overnight or staying for several days in Greenwich when they come to London. Now, I think we've moved on quite a long way, and the Olympics has helped that enormously. And we are beginning to get a hotel infrastructure. But at the time, this was 4 or 5 years ago, there wasn't very much, and this seemed a good opportunity, and I supported that. Now, the council didn't like it, they turned it down. On appeal, the plan was approved by the planning inspectorate and by the Secretary of State because it clearly conformed with planning policy. The recession has clearly forced the hospital into reconsidering its plans. It's not now going to go ahead. But what for me is important is the market is safe. There will be a retention of the market, and there will be some investment in the future of the area. There won't, sadly, be putting right the damage done after the war when some of the bomb damage was repaired rather shabbily. Yeah. And that was all going to be done as part of the big scheme, but that now will be lost. So, it's a disappointment in one sense, but the main thing is the market will be preserved and will continue to flourish, and that's a good thing.
I saw one criticism of you,
yes,
that you usually tend to seek the knowledge of experts and agencies rather than seek the other politicians and perhaps campaigners. What do you have? That's with reference again to the market.
It's an interesting observation. I kind of try and listen to everyone.
Yeah.
And I do like to get expert advice. I think it's silly not to. I think it's foolish of politicians to believe that they can substitute their judgment for expert advice. You'd never say you'd take the advice of a politician rather than a surgeon about what operation you need. And the same applies in so many other fields. So I do like to listen to experts, but I don't disregard the views of the public. And I think any politician who did wouldn't have a very good future. And I take some comfort that in the last general election, when it wasn't a good election for Labour, we were losing seats all over the country, and most of my colleagues had their majorities greatly reduced. I actually had a small increase in my majority.
I see, it's about 100 and...
It's an increase of only nine.
Oh, was it 9?
The majority was 9 larger in 2010 than it had been in 25. And that, against the background of the very bad result for Labour generally, I was very pleased.
And that brings me to this year, Nick, that it's been a monumental year in Greenwich. How's it affected you, and how do you think it's affected Greenwich?
Oh, I think it's been a fantastic year for Greenwich. I'm very, very proud to be MP for the area. We've had the Royal Borough status, we've had the Queen's visit, the reopening of the Cutty Sark. We obviously had the Olympics and Paralympics, which were triumphant, successful.
Right, well, at this point, I'd just like to do a sort of quick-fire few questions at you, Nick. What's been your most extravagant purchase?
Oh, gosh. Probably my camera.
Your camera. What's people's biggest misconceptions of you?
That I'm bald, old, grey and boring.
Your favourite piece of music?
Probably Beethoven's late string quartets.
Your favourite building in Greenwich?
The Queen's House.
What is your guilty pleasure?
Chocolates.
What do you most love about Greenwich?
The extraordinary diversity, the beauty of its setting, the park, the grandeur of its great buildings, the diversity of the population and the sense of vitality and excitement. This is an urban community which is buzzing and a very exciting place, and I'm very privileged to represent it.
Describe yourself in 5 words.
An enthusiast who hides that enthusiasm behind a sober exterior.
Very good. And finally, Nick, I'd like to talk a load of cobblers with you. And I think you know what I'm talking about. My
lifetime support for Northampton Town Football Club. It's been a labour of love through 35 to 40 years of pain and very, very few moments of glory. Well, but I remain a supporter of the cobblers.
You're big on cobblers. And I'm very pleased to say I've had a message from Richard Cardoza, who's the chairman of Northampton Town Football Club. And he says best wishes to you and everyone who's cobbling at Cobblers, Northampton Football Club.
Thank you very much.
And as you just said, your guilty pleasure is chocolate. So, Nick Raynsford, I'd like to give you a present for being on Robert's Full English Breakfast Show. Nick, thanks.
Thank you very much indeed.
It was great.